that when the Department of Justice Office of Inspector General went to review the devices of the investigative team, Mueller's team had erased the data on at least several dozen phones for various reasons. To learn more about this and its significance, we've invited to speak with us today Marc Ruskin. Now, Marc is a 27-year veteran of the FBI, a regular contributor to the Epoch Times, and author of The Pretender: My Life Undercover for the FBI. He also served on the legislative staff of U.S. Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, served as an assistant district attorney in Brooklyn, New York, and is an adjunct professor at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Let's jump into that now. Hey, Marc, it's great having you back on Crossroads.
Great to be back, Josh. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, no, it's great having you back. So, first off, we've heard this news story now that the Mueller Special Counsel, they were asked to hand over their cell phones to DOJ, Department of Justice investigators, and they erased several dozen phones. Now, there's different excuses for this. Some say they had to erase them, some say they couldn't access the devices, and they erased themselves. Some said that they just had to do it. Now, in terms of your own work, doing investigations like this for the FBI, work with the Department of Justice, is this common practice, and how would this normally be treated if investigators are checked for things like this and it turns out they deleted their phones?
Well, the obvious response would be that there's a suspicion on the part of these prosecutors, on members of the Mueller team, of having actually engaged in what's referred to as tampering with evidence. But tampering with evidence is a crime in and of itself, as distinguished from obstruction of justice. Now, when the Mueller report came out, there was much talk about obstruction of justice and whether or not there had been obstruction of justice. But in this case, it really would fall under the umbrella of tampering with evidence, which involved, among other things, can be defined as the destruction of potential evidence of criminal activity. Now, since it was destroyed, we don't know what the content was and whether or not there was criminal activity on the part of these prosecutors, but it's certainly a strong possibility. And one would ordinarily have to start to think about would be what was the content of these texts, let's say, that would cause someone to actually wipe the memory clean on a number of cell phones. Obviously, if there were 20 plus cell phones, which all happen to have their memory wiped clean due to excessive entry of erroneous passwords on the part of professional prosecutors or of attorneys, it would seem like to go beyond to stretch credulity to think that there's any kind of coincidence involved. So there's a lot of issues that come up now. For example, not just the content, but you would also have the phone logs themselves, like who was being called, at what time were the calls made, and what's the sequence of calls. For example, let's say one's looking at Andrew Weitzman's phone, for example, looking at a log of incoming and outgoing calls, not even looking at the content now, but just looking at the log itself. What if there's an incoming call from Christopher Steele, and then 10 minutes later there's an outgoing call to Rob Mueller, and then 10 minutes later there's an outgoing from CC. That's now apparently been lost, but that's the kind of information which we would be perhaps what they were trying to obfuscate and hide.
Now,
I'll mention, for example,
go ahead, sir. Good question. Well, I think one big question a lot of people would have is, wouldn't call logs like that be held by the phone carriers as well? One, so couldn't they still get that from the phone carriers? And two, if all they did was reset these phones to their factory settings, I mean, the average guy on the street, we think that, the FBI can recover your data if they, really want your data. And we hear all this stuff about the, federal agencies like the NSA having logs of all of our stuff. Can't they use that type of data for things like this? Or is that, is this just sci-fi spy movie type stuff?
Well, I would think that if nowhere else, that on the Department of Justice enterprise servers, at time by law, logs of all of this kind of information. So perhaps it won't be easy to access technically, and also legally. It may be necessary to follow legal procedures in order to have access. But I would be surprised if there aren't Department of Justice servers somewhere upon which this data would reside. Perhaps what they were, either they didn't think that far ahead, or they didn't think that it would go that far at the time that they wiped their cell phones clean. I'll mention the importance of this kind of data is such that in many FBI investigations, the FBI uses what we refer to as pen registers. A pen register is essentially a machine which is attached technically to a phone line and does not record the content, because the content now is protected, and you need a judicial warrant to intercept content. But you don't need a judicial warrant to intercept what's registered in the pen register, which is the actual numbers being called and the numbers calling in and the time and date of these calls. And that is used a lot in white-collar investigations and in terrorist and criminal enterprise, or organized crime type of investigation. So the data is important data and could be revelatory in this particular situation.
And we'd think an investigation into the President of the United States, that would be held at least on that same level of importance, that they would use a device like this. I mean, given standard protocol, would that be the normal standard of protocol?
Right. Well, one would imagine, if in a reasonable world, that the highest possible standards would be applied in an investigation involving the highest level of political figures. But we have to look a little bit also at who are the characters that are involved. I mean, in particular, Andrew Weissman, if one looks at his history with regard to the investigations of Enron, or the prosecutions of Enron and Arthur Anderson, as well as Senator Ted Stevens of Alaska, you have the impression that we're dealing here with individuals who, though sworn to enforce the law, seem willing to play fast and loose with the law when it serves what they believe or perceive perhaps to be a justifiable end. And look at other examples in this particular case, what's referred to as Brady material. Brady material is evidence that's in the possession of the prosecution that is exculpatory. And Brady is a Supreme Court decision which obliges prosecutors to divulge this kind of information. And just looking at here in recent cases, look at the Michael Flynn prosecution, where you appear to have a good example of Brady material being withheld from a criminal defendant in a very high profile and high level investigation.
Now, that said, folks, again, we're broadcasting 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. If you want to support us, again, please join us on Patreon. You can find the link to the Crossroads page on Patreon in the description below. If you haven't already, also, please don't forget to like and subscribe on this channel. It really helps us grow. And if you want to go the extra miles I always mention, please tell a friend or family member about Crossroads and consider sharing this video. Now, that said, please take care of yourselves, stay healthy, and stay free.